Welcome back. You're now watching the political segment on The Weekend Show. My name is Andy Madaki. With less than 1 year to the 2023 elections, political parties have started screenings for their candidates and contestants. However, Nigerians have raised concerns about the cost of tickets for nomination and expression of interest. It goes as high as 100 million naira within the ruling APC and about 40 million within the PDP for president. You have the likes of YPP at 10 million naira, and I think there's ADP which is giving their tickets for free. Now, some of the parties have stated that the reason why it is this high is to avoid the bastardization of the process where anyone will just come out and run for presidency. However, human rights activist Femi Falana, senior advocate of Nigeria, has stated that this is non-constitutional, immoral, and illegal. We will be having a conversation about the implication of the high cost of nomination fees and how it affects the policy, the polity, and the people of Nigeria. And having this conversation with me, I have Kelvin Emmanuel, who is a return guest on the show, the CEO of Diary Hills Limited. Welcome back to the Weekend Show.
Thank you, Andy.
Also joining us is Kasiana Igo Ogogorie. He is a lawyer and public analyst.
Thanks for having me.
I'll start with your initial thoughts on the prices, the cost of entry to run for president in Nigeria. We know that even regardless of the fact that there are other parties and they have smaller, cheaper costs for their tickets, the two major parties in Nigeria remains the APC and PDP, and this has now set a huge barrier for entry. What are your thoughts on the current costs?
Well, like you said, the party came out and gave a clarification and said that one of the reasons why they decided to raise the price is to avoid bastardization of the process. You can see in the opposition party, PDP, there are about 14 major aspirants. Yesterday they did screening. I do not think, even if I agree with Mr. Falana when he said that it's immoral, it's unconstitutional for the price of entry to be that high, I do not think this is the real crux of the issue, because this is internal party affairs. And moreover, the post of presidency is not a position that should be open to just anyone. As a matter of fact, a few days ago, I watched a video of one of the younger presidential aspirants answering questions on what policy plans the aspirant has if the aspirant becomes the president of Nigeria. And I was curious to see that there wasn't really enough depth. You know, not like I'm saying that the young people don't have the capacity. I feel it's time for the young people to lead Nigeria. I'm saying that it's important for people to realize that before they come and say, oh, I want to run for the office of the president, they need to count the cost. It's not a joke.
But while we say they look at the cost, and this is the reality, but you have people who are coming to say they need to change the system and fix the problems which have been caused by previous people. With such huge cost of entry, when these people come, some people take loans, some people have people funding them. Isn't this just funding corruption? Because once those people come in, they want to repay the people who funded them to run for this elections.
And this comes back to the issue of the Electoral Act 2022 that was assented by the president several weeks ago. This comes back to sections 89, sections 92, sections 93, subsections 4, sections 91, subsection 9, that deals with everything from election contributions reports, elections expenses reports, the annual report of political parties. The election contribution reports basically says that 3 months after the elections, the political parties are obligated by law to submit to INEC their contributions, disclose who contributed what. Elections expenses report talks about the expenses that was incurred during the elections for a particular candidate. The financial statement talks about the assets and liabilities, ALM of the political parties, declaration. Then when you go to sections 91.9, it talks about the cap on what each individual is allowed to contribute to a political party, right? So when you talk about this issue of funding for political parties and funding for campaigns, and the idea that when they spend so much money on the campaign, wouldn't they want to recover the money in office, especially to the people who were principal and center to funding the elections? This is a reality in Nigeria. But we can't shy away from the fact that at the end of the day, the law of the land by the Constitution has empowered INEC to enforce the Electoral Act on the political parties to make sure that there are strict penalties for violating those acts, like disqualification, and in areas where they are criminal, recommend charges to the Attorney General for prosecution of those erring parties. We have to come back full circle to the Electoral Act.
So, while we celebrated the Electoral Act, it was the amendment. It was one of the things which was meant to fix some of these problems and create a bit of accountability. I remember about 2 weeks on the show, we spoke about how all the political parties are meant to submit their registers of members, and only one party had done that. But let's come back to you, Kesena, especially with what Kelvin said, and I would love so much to disagree about some of the young people are not having the debt. Doesn't this exclude a section of the populace? Because according to the Constitution, no one should be excluded by reason of class, which also now is tied to their economic status. But also, you're a young person, you want to run, and you know you may have to be one of the two major parties. I saw Adamu Garba complaining on Twitter about the cost of the tickets, and he is in the APC. Your opening statements, what's your general thoughts on this?
So, I would say presidency or leadership is a serious job. And typically, like the world over, if you want to run for an office, it's assumed that you have mass following across the country. And it's what they call political mobilization. It's done in the US, in the UK, where the citizens actually contribute to the campaign. They send envelopes, could be £1, £2. So I would like to assume, based on what I've heard and read, that is the line that APC is trying to toe. Because if you're running for president, 36 states, you should have supporters across the country. So for me, 100 million naira should not be a problem. If you really want to lead the country, because if you cannot raise 100 million from your supporters, then how are you going to get the votes at the elections? So that's what I would like to assume the reason why APC went that route. So I won't see it as exclusion. It's not really exclusion, because if you have following, then it should be doable.
So let's dig a little deeper. Let's drop our elitist hats.
Okay.
When people pay for this, and now we do know that some of these people who have indicated interest to run for presidency will not get the ticket. And so this is buying a seat in the next administration by saying, by doing this, I need to be compensated. How does this affect their performance and Nigerians in the long run?
I think it's just the way politics is in Nigeria, like, unfortunately. I was watching a program a while ago, and someone was saying how those monies are actually contributions. But if you look at it critically, what he was trying to say was, I've contributed to the process. So obviously, when you get to government, you need to carry us along. What they call dividends of democracy. If you don't do that, then they'll say, oh, they'll start fighting. They'll have factions. And if you dig, you find out that they probably contributed to the elections. They bought forms, but they did not give them appointment. They did not give them contracts. That's what we now call dividends of democracy. So I think it's just the way politics is in Nigeria, which is very unfortunate. I think the leadership recruitment process in Nigeria is very terrible. It's not by merit. It's not by what you know, how you can contribute. It's about, oh, what did this guy do in the campaign? So you see a lot of people now, even 8 years, 7 years into the government, some people are still fighting the governor or the president because he promised them appointment 7 years prior, but till today, it hasn't come. So I don't really know. That's just the way the process is. There's a lot of politics monetized in Nigeria. And if I want to be critical, I think it has to do with how democracy started in Nigeria in 1999. From 1993, the annulment, Abacha's death, there was now a long period of military rule. Then Abacha died. They now brought Obasanjo from prison. So everything was a bit rushed. So there was no proper political environment. It wasn't tidy. There were no civil societies. There were no academics. There were no intellectuals. They just handed over government and they left. Although they tried to, or they established some agencies, you know, political orientation, Chief Jerry Ghana, Babangida, but they never actually took root to actually achieve what they wanted to do. So that left a gap, it left a lacuna, like we say in law, and then it left the political space open for all sorts of persons, you know, coming in from all corners. So, and if you look, most of the people in government as we speak, you know, they started government in 1999, 2003. So some of them had political alignment. So there was no proper structure for the handover. So I think that's even the constitution as well was just given to us. So that's why we have the problem. So I think until those issues are resolved, I don't see the way forward, unfortunately.
You know, I must give credit to the CSOs and NGOs because I know for a fact how they pushed for the electoral amendments. Even including academia, we've seen the involvement of professors and universities done as resident electoral commissioners and returning officers in the election. However, 20 years on of uninterrupted democracy, we still have the same problems. But the implication economically on the candidates and the people, when you get to the grassroots, the expectation now is, even for House of Reps, if you can afford about 40 million to buy a ticket, or about 10 million to buy a ticket, you go to the rural areas and they ask you, where's our own share? And so the election is now about money.
Andy, this brings back to the debate on the process of selecting candidates. This issue we have with how primaries are conducted. Yeah. And the reason why there is this apathy at the grassroots is because we're in a low trust society where Nigerians have been taken for granted for so long. So they feel like, I want my own share of the national cake, however small it is. So if it takes 4 years for you to come ask me for my own share, for my own vote, I will ask for my own share of the national cake. That's the sentiment at the grassroots. So at the grassroots, they're like, if I get a bag of rice and 2 jerry cans of groundnut oil, well, what have they given me before? Now, this brings back, and this is where I disagree with Mr. President and his inner circle, when he rejected the direct primaries as a basic way to elect select candidates in the primaries. This idea of having an indirect delegate system where each state, for example, if you look at the opposition PDP, you notice that each state has an average of between 100 and 140 delegates to the convention. The state governors and the party chieftains in the state control those delegates. So basically, it's a race for, among the 14 major candidates, who is able to get the most blocks from each state. Oyo has about 180 delegates. Imo has, I think, 175 delegates. Adamawa has about 111 delegates or 108 delegates, if I'm not mistaken. And they are spread like this, okay? So it's a fight for who gets delegates. You're able to convince the governor and the chieftains that you're the best person for the party based on all the geopolitical permutations. He gives you his delegates. But it's not for free. Let's be honest. Because you notice that at convention grounds, money is shared. This is the job of the INEC, to ban the sharing of money to delegates to influence the decision for who they chose at the primaries. Because I keep saying that everybody keeps focusing on general elections. And I said, if the 2 major parties select bad candidates, the general elections is inconsequential. Why do you want the general elections if the both parties have bad candidates? So for me, the most important part of the elections in any country are the primaries. This is why I disagree with Mr. President. This is why I believe that the direct primary should be the only means of selecting candidates at the political parties. Indirect should not be there. Consensus should not be there. In fact, consensus is even worse than indirect.
You know, that's my next point, and I want to come to you. We'll come back to you, Kelvin, Yes, so in the amended Electoral Act, and this was a huge topic of debate within the National Assembly, we now have the provisions to have direct, indirect, or consensus candidates. However, we have seen a new trend towards consensus candidates, which takes us back to the PDP era where the party decides. And so, which is why we're having this conversation about money. Regardless of what you are spending, at some point, we've seen it with the selection of party leaderships in the PDP and APC in their convention. PDP chose its national chairman as a consensus candidate, and that went smoothly. The APC as well, after not being able to hold the convention since 2020, were able to do this. Now, what do you think about this consensus candidate clause, which he speaks against, and how it affects selecting or electing the right people to represent the party? Doesn't it just pave way for the biggest money bag?
With the consensus, as per the Electoral Act,
Yes.
everybody actually has to agree and sign off. So if that actually happens, like to the T, they don't.
No, but when you say,
If they don't-
sorry
Yeah,
to
go on,
interject,
yeah.
but we've saw what happened with the APC convention. They followed the decision of the president. We saw people come on stage crying because there was no agreement, there was no signing, and they had people imposed on them.
I think it's just like every other thing in most laws. They are the laws, but they're not really implemented. If you to them, it's basically like, okay, this is what we've done. Do what you want. Like, go to court. They don't really care. But for me, my own view on the whole primary issue is that the argument at the time was that that the National Assembly cannot decide the internal democracy for a political party. But for me, it was a bit strange because that internal democracy talking about in some months' time is going to be external. In other words, if you choose indirect candidates, then Nigerians now vote that person. So if you look at it, it's actually not internal because it was chosen by your party, but then Nigerians now decide. So for me, if you ask me, it should be direct primary. Let the same Nigerians, members of the parties, vote their candidates, then it now extends to the general elections where the whole Nigerians vote. But if it's maybe national chairman, those are actually internal because they don't really have external effects. But for the presidents, governors, senators, you can argue it's internal, but that person now becomes the flag bearer for the party, and now one day becomes the president or governor or senator. So I don't really agree with that argument.
So yeah. Kelvin, you were beginning to speak against a consensus clause within the amended Electoral Act. Why?
I'll tell you why. You see, the reason why consensus is as bad as indirect is just that consensus is worse than indirect, and why direct primary is the best, and why you notice that most of the members of the Nigerian Governors Forum, the governors, fought tooth and nail against direct primaries is because they realize that if it's direct primaries, they don't have control as much over the system of selecting the candidates at the primaries, which is the most important part of any elections. Any elections is decided at the primaries. Okay? The consensus is a system where the party chieftains just come together, they sit down, and they have a meeting. And they air their views. The person with the most leverage in the room gets to pick and makes trade-offs. And say, oh, for you conceding to my choice, this will be allotted to you. For you conceding to my choice, this block will be allotted to you. And they basically share up the country. How do you have a democracy where the decision on who leads at several capacities is not decided by the people? How do you have a democracy where the governors of states who control the delegates decide who becomes the flag bearer of a party? Is the governor making decisions based on the will of the people? That's the question we have to ask. The APC has 7,800 delegates to their convention in June. The governors in the APC control the delegates along with the party chieftains. Are the governors in the APC in Kaduna, in Ogun, in Osun, in Ondo, in Borno, in Kano, are they making decisions on who becomes the flag bearer of the APC based on like a poll they've taken of a critical mass of people in their states? Or are they just sitting down in a meeting and making trade-offs? For me, I feel that so much focus is placed on the general election, and this is where INEC comes on based on the Electoral Act. Now, the law has been amended. It says that there's a provision for direct, indirect, and consensus. If INEC has been given direct primaries, and it was based on INEC to verify every single candidate that is to vote at the direct primaries, and confirm that they're authentic, they are not ghost voters, and to confirm that the laws that govern campaign financing, as provided in sections 89 to sections 92, sections 93.4, are not violated, you will see even if it's not perfect, a closer reflection of the will of the people. If 100,000 delegates, 100,000 people vote to choose who becomes their candidate for a political party, it's going to be a closer reflection of the will of the people than if a bunch of delegates who sit down with their governors at a meeting decide who becomes the primary candidate of a political party.
So let's go to the bread and butter of the elections. And I'm sure you may have noticed that we've gone back to a system where it's no longer about the ideals, about the philosophy, about the plan for Nigeria. It's now a race for the seats to unseat one party or to retain the position. President Muhammadu Buhari ran based on three major points: insecurity, the economy, and fighting corruption. Nigerians have their opinion on how he has acted. In the next election, what questions should Nigerians be asking the next set of candidates? And I'll start with you, Kassina. What major areas do you think we should hold them accountable and responsible for?
I think it's the same problems 2015. You know, I mean, it's still where we are: insecurity, economic situation. But I think generally, Nigerians. So in US, for example, when candidates campaign for elections, when you say, "Oh, I'm going to move this cup from here to point A to point B," they ask you, "Excuse me, please, could you explain to us how you are going to move the cup from point A to point B?" And then they hear what you have to say. And then if it's achievable, then you say, "Okay, it's possible." But the problem with Nigerians, I think, is they don't ask questions. They don't. They're not critical in their analysis. They say, "Oh, do $1 to $1." You say, "Yes, we're voting," but it's not economically possible. But we just anything they say, we say yes. We now accuse them. But if you look at it, some of the things they are accusing that they didn't do, half of them they physically cannot be done. They just said that Nigerians were gullible. Obviously, Nigeria was in a parlor state, so they were just and decided to vote Muhammadu Buhari. But yeah, so that's where we are. So I think moving forward, you know, the debate should be taken more seriously. You know, some candidates don't even come for debate. They think it doesn't matter. For example, for me, I think it should be one of the requirements. You should come for debates. We want to hear what you have to say, what you want to do, and then when we critically X-ray the candidates, we now vote them on the election. Then at that point now we can now hold them accountable because okay, that cop say he wanted to move from point A to point B. It could be moved, but you didn't move it. But at this point, some of the things is like that cup cannot be moved. It's not possible. So now, where do we start from?
Kelvin, what questions should we be asking of the next set of candidates?
Like he said, I think the debate should be twofold. It should be both at the primaries. The political parties should organize debate for their own candidates. Then it should be at the general elections. And the questions are very obvious. Number one, justice reforms. About 85% of the inmates in prisons scattered around Nigeria are awaiting trial for several issues. Awaiting trial for fraud, awaiting trial for murder, all kinds of issues. Awaiting trial for rape. The courts are filled. The average judge has about 15 to 20 cases on his cause list on a normal sitting day. Yeah? There are not enough judges and enough courts and enough infrastructure. This comes back to the executive order President Buhari signed to bypass the law on the structure of funding for the judiciary. Judiciary is supposed to be a first-line charge to the National Judicial Council. Justice reforms. Number two, on the issue of energy, how do we proceed forward? Provision of raw material inputs for fertilizer, security on PMS, bringing down the cost of diesel. How do you want to wind down the refineries owned by the government? How do you want to revive steel mining and production in Nigeria? Educational reforms. Do you want to continue to fund 144 universities, colleges of education, and polytechnics in Nigeria? Or do you want to privatize it and set up private endowment funds? On the issue of food security, what's your plan? What's the plan of the Minister of Agriculture? Yep. On the issue of security, which is a very important and critical point, how do you want to coordinate with governments in Niger, in Chad, in Benin Republic, to have like a coherent plan to tackle insecurity in Nigeria? What's your cultural strategy along with your kinetic strategy of the armed forces? On the issue of oil theft in the Niger Delta, what's the plan of the Joint Task Force to rein in the corruption within their ranks and to also fight the coordinated stealing of crude oil, 200,000 barrels of crude oil a day that makes Nigeria fall short of its OPEC quota? Yeah. On the issue of the excess crude accounts, how are you going to tackle it, which is a 20-year debate that we've had of collapsing the ECA either into the Consolidated Revenue Fund for appropriation or into the Sovereign Wealth Fund? On the issue of the per capita income of Nigerians, yep, how do you improve the standard of living of Nigerians? What areas are you going to focus on? What are the pain points? How do you ensure fiscal federalism and devolve powers from the exclusive legislative list to the concurrent list to give more regions control of their resources and pay back royalties to the center?
Calvin, but this is a huge laundry list, and how feasible is this in 4 years? But we'll come back to that. Let's bring Kasena in. Another 20-year debate is the issue of fuel subsidy. Nigeria's debt profile is constantly rising and it's quite high, and some people will tell you it's not high enough and so we are fine. But this is a conversation which we have had time and time again. The Nigerian government has tried to remove subsidies, but over time we've seen that it may or may not affect their political party's chances in the next election. What do you think should be the next president's role or take on oil subsidy?
I think very, very briefly, I think we need to move away from oil. We need to diversify. I mean, they always say it, but they actually never do it. So there are different sectors: agriculture, sports, other sectors that could actually get us funds. Because at the minute, I think we're too focused on oil, and the world is moving. I think the UK, they've already set a timeline where they're going to stop using fuel cars. So by default, our oil is going to be almost useless. So I think we need to actually start looking towards that and actually come up with a plan, like a roadmap, because I think it's very strange, because if we actually set up a roadmap, maybe 20 years plan, and then a government comes in, follows that plan, the next government comes in, follows that. I think it comes with PDP comes, they do their own, another party comes, they do their own. So there's no, when you look at the 20 years, you can see that there are actually no development. It's just a change of government, literally.
Calvin, yeah. Fuel subsidy to be removed or to stay?
Fuel subsidy has to be removed. In fact,
regardless of the economic situation of Nigerians?
There's a constitutional conflict that if the president signs the Petroleum Industry Act, it's illegal for you to continue to fund subsidy. And in fact, in my own estimation, Nigeria should not spend more than 1.6 trillion naira of fuel subsidy. The 2.4 trillion naira addition to the 1.6 trillion naira, the Federal Executive Council has to come to Nigerians to explain where that comes from. Because in my own estimation, Nigerians don't consume more than 45 million liters of PMS on a daily basis. There are reports that about 30% of the PMS that is brought into Nigeria for consumption on a daily basis is actually diverted. Yeah? So fuel subsidy has to be removed because Aliko Dangote has come out to say that his company is indeed going to start refining in October. Yeah, so the subsidiary of NNPC in charge of crude oil swap and bringing in PMS for Nigeria might wind down its activities, okay? But we also have to look at the broader strategy for the NNPC as a private company going forward, yeah? We have to tap into the power of oil and gas, yeah? We have to tap into the power of piped natural gas, first within Nigeria and then without Nigeria. We can see that with the Russian embargo, Europe needs gas. In fact, Russia cut Bulgaria and Poland off gas like 3 days ago.
Correct.
Yeah, and these countries are actively looking for gas. And the way to achieve this is to go through either the Trans-Sahara or the North Moroccan, Nigerian-Moroccan gas pipeline, the NMGP. And experts have kicked against Trans-Sahara because of the security risk of going through Niger all the way to Algeria. So we have to look at moving an official strategy paper. Yeah, the Office of the Director General of Budget and the Minister of Finance and National Budget Planning, they have to look at diversifying the official strategy paper away from debt to revenue. Nigeria's revenue to GDP is about 6%. South Africa and Morocco is 19 to 22%. South Africa's budget is more than $200 billion. Nigeria's budget is about $40 billion. And you're still borrowing about 30% of that to fund your budget. So we need to generate revenues. We need to increase our revenue to GDP ratio. We need to generate revenues for the government to be able to fund its budget without borrowing more money and raising the cost of debt servicing.
Quick one, let's talk about restructuring and devolution of powers, which you started that conversation, and I would like to hear from both of you. We have seen state governors become kings in their own rights. If restructuring, as a case is made and pushed for, wouldn't this lead to a bit of rascality on the part of the state governors?
That is a very important point, and this is the reason why we have to take the independence of the legislative arms, the state House of Assemblies, and the independence of the judiciary away from the state governors. There was a judgment in 2014 that says the allocation to the judiciary should be a first-line charge and should be payable to the National Judicial Council. And then we know how that has gone, because at the Supreme Court, the executive order EO 10 was defeated. If you take the state legislature, the funding for the state House of Assemblies away from the state governors, if you take the funding for the state judiciaries away from the state governors, if you separate the office of the Minister of Justice from the office of the Attorney General, which was one of the recommendations of the National Conference in 2014, and make sure that the political appointee to the Ministry of Justice as the Minister of Justice is entirely separate from the Attorney General of the Federation, you will see these checks and balances for the governors. And you will see that the governors cannot strong-arm the State House of Assembly members into voting his way by saying, I'm going to restrict your allocation. The governors cannot influence unduly against the constitutional provisions the activities of the state judiciary.
Let's hear your thoughts on restructuring and devolution of powers, especially to the states.
I think if you devolve powers, like you said, it might be a problem because of the powers that the governors hold in the states. But for me, if you look at that power we're talking about, what is really the power? Power essentially is money. So for me, Nigeria needs to reduce the cost of governance. Cost of governance is too high, because at the minute it's a thing of winner takes all. So if we reduce the cost of governance, possibly a parliamentary system of government, maybe single term of 6 years, for example, you come, you deal 6 years, you leave, you reduce the cost of governance, then it will be less attractive for people to say, oh, let me become a governor, take loans, sell houses, those sorts of things, so they can get, because when they get there, they're going to be a lot of money that they could get back from the system. So I think for me, that's the key, because all of this governor's power, state police, they will abuse it. Judiciary, the law has been there already. They will abuse it, but not when you remove their immunity clause. If you remove their immunity clause and tell them that they can be prosecuted while in office, they will not abuse it. The laws are there, about the judiciary first is there, but the problem is the judiciary and is not actually independent. So, but if we reduce the funds there, then I think that'll go a long way.
Okay, let's talk about security. We've seen the security situation in Nigeria evolve from what it was and metamorphose into other sectors and other regions. And so we've gone from fighting insurgency in the northeast to now dealing with banditry, farmer header crisis, and now what can be termed full-blown terrorism with people being abducted on the Abuja-Kaduna rail line, which is pretty much close to the seat of power. What do you think the next set of leaders should do about the security situation?
So for me, security, every problem is local and the solution is also local. So as in security, the idea of a federal police structure for me is long, that's since past is used by date. So for me, it's very simple. We need to localize security. I didn't say state police, I said localize. Localize likes of Amotoko in the southwest, Ibebeago in the southeast. This is what we need to put in place, because actually, state police might be difficult, because if you look at the Constitution, Section 214, it establishes national police force and it also prohibits any other force. So for you to have state police, we need to now amend the Constitution, which might be a long process. So in the interim, we can have local securities, probably in every state. Like in my state, Delta, we have what they call Delta Hawk. So we have this in every state. In every people that are from there, they know the terrain, they know the. I think it's to go a long way. Until that happens, I don't see.
So while there's a case for that, I saw on social media last week, and unfortunately in my state, Benue State, where I think they have some security agency for forestry or whatever, and a young girl, they had those agents cutting off her hair because it was dyed blonde. And so back to abuse of power. Whether we call it state policing, community policing, or localizing, there's still the abuse of power by the individuals who may not be held accountable, and also the state governors. So what's your solution? What do you feel the next set of leaders should look at when it comes to security or insecurity, as the case may be?
There is a kinetic strategy, there is a cultural strategy, and there's an economic strategy. The kinetic strategy for me is for Mr. President to amend the Sovereign Wealth Fund and include a defense fund, collapse the ECA into it to fund the purchase of artillery and armory for the Nigerian Armed Forces, the Air Force, the Army, and in several areas of Nigeria, the Navy, coastal areas. The cultural strategy is to work with the community leaders to place strict penalties and guide them on ensuring that they, talk to the youths. At the ward level. The economic strategy, there are 11 million Almajiris in Nigeria. 11 million out of school, Almajiris. Education. The Northern Governors Forum, the next president of Nigeria needs to focus on ensuring that there is a huge education and literacy drive in the North. Because we can't divorce the brainwashing of young people in the North from the fact that a lot of them are out of school and they don't have jobs, they don't have income.
Final question, 1 minute each. The role of young people in the next elections. What should young people do?
It's already too late for the young people. I think, like everyone has said,
it's never too late, Calvin.
the young people should go out en masse and get their voters card. But beyond that, they should plan for the next elections. The young people need to set up political action committees, and they need to realize that if they don't put their money on the table, they cannot dictate how the pipe.
I think that's a good way to leave that. What's your take?
The election, I think young people should come out and vote. I would say that there's no vote that doesn't count, because if it doesn't count, then they will not be giving out monies to you to sell your vote. So I think people should come out, get their PVCs, and exercise their franchise.
Kelvin and Kassina, I think that's a great place to leave it, and it's been a pleasure having you on the political segment of the weekend show, and that's the much we can take on this segment. And to our viewers at home, we do thank you for giving us your time and watching the weekend show today. For those of you who missed parts of it, you can catch up with us on social media, The Weekend Show NG, on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also follow me on social media, Andy Maduki on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We also do have our TV, our episodes recorded and hosted on YouTube, so you can check The Weekend Show NG on YouTube to watch our other episodes and also a recap of today's episodes. Signing out on the show, we do have a special guest performance who will be closing the show. From me, have a blessed weekend and stay safe.